Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Neil Shorthouse. Now, Neil is the founder and chief executive of his own business, Shorthouse Hospitality. He founded the business after a number of decades worth of experience globally, working across various different types of global organizations. He's worked for household name brands, starting off his career working for Disney. Then he's been off to work for organizations such as Emirates, five-star hotels, and more latterly, even sits on the board of the Leila Academies Trust. I'm very excited to speak with Neil today because he's had a wealth of experience within the global HR arena. And I think especially given at the present times where we're facing uncertain challenges, HR directors, people officers globally are required more than ever before, and putting people at the heart of organizations is absolutely critical. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much for being here. And for those of us who perhaps, or our listeners who don't know you as well as I have had the opportunity to, I wonder whether you could give us a brief synopsis of some of the key projects you're doing right now with Shorthouse Hospitality, and also how you came to be where you are today. Because I know you travelled far and wide, across the ocean's blue, as it were, and seen much of what there is to see when it comes to HR. So talk to us a little bit about some of those escapades and what you've been up to more of late.
Yes, so basically, like many individuals, started off, college studying hotel management, and finished that, and then wanted to get into hospitality management. Initially, working for the big chains back in the days in London. Now, when I went, they said you had to do food and beverage, which I didn't want to do. So I almost restarted my career, albeit at university. I got the opportunity to work for Walt Disney World in Florida. Whilst there, Disney were starting to create the very first cruise line, Disney Cruise Line. I received a phone call and needless to say, ended up flying out to Florida, spending a few months in Florida, and then having the opportunity to go to the shipyard in Venice, Italy, where we launched the Disney Magic, the very first Disney Cruise Line vessel. And that's some 20 years ago now. I was fortunate enough to do their second ship. And then from there came back to the UK for about a year or so, and then ended up working the seven seas for the next 10 or 12 years. Whilst at sea, if those of you not quite sure the ship structure within the hotel department, you have what is affectionately known as the purser's department, a bit like your front office. And within that, you are then have a separate area just for the crew, which is more like your sort of traditional purser's personnel office, not HR. And then did that for a while. And then this private luxury ship called The World had launched. And I applied for a job there as an onboard HR manager, which was my first foray within the human resources field, if you will. And it was also very new for the cruise industry. Up until that point, everything laid with the captain. The captain made the final decisions. Now you had somebody on board the ship as a HR manager that was there to provide strategic guidance, but also to support the ship's management team. So it became very much more a key department within the shipboard structure. So had the opportunity to work on The World with such companies as Regent Seven Seas, Fred Olsen Cruise Lines, and some other cruise lines that unfortunately are no longer with us, but had a lot of fun working with them. And during that time, we did a few projects whereby the ships will go into refurbishment. And as HR, you have to make sure you've got enough individuals to look after the ship while it's sort of out of the water. I did that for about 10, 12 years, and then thought, can I actually do what I do at sea at land? So everyone's thinking you go to London, come off the ships. Well, I ended up in the Maldives, and that's now 12 years ago. So in 2008, started working in the Maldives as a cluster director of HR for Minor Group, and was there for a number of years, and then sort of came back and did some work within the UK, then went back out again to the Maldives and helped launch Cheval Blanc, Louis Vuitton Moët Hennessy's first resort in the Maldives. From there through to Asia, working for Six Senses. And then from Six Senses came back to the UK and we started Shorthouse Hospitality.
Wow, I mean, that is literally, it sounds an absolute roller coaster of a career. And, you know, for those who I don't think have ever worked in hospitality, and I suppose, you know, I recall kind of early youth working at, you know, Pizza Express and restaurants and things like this, which was all great and all fun. But there seems something unbelievably exciting about being out there on a cruise liner, you know, kind of, you know, hopping around from different islands, and then also doing what is ultimately a, you know, also a senior and a challenging role, because HR is actually, you know, it's a lot tougher than I think people really give it credit for, and least of all being on a moving vessel. I mean, that sounds pretty challenging to me.
Yeah, I mean, the role on board the ship up until a number of years ago was predominantly, as I said, like a personnel manager. You basically signed the crew on, gave them their accommodation, and you paid their salary. Whereas the HR role became very more strategic in the sense that you worked very closely with the corporate office, you worked very closely with the shipboard management team, and you were there providing guidance, everything from, you know, harassment cases through to performance management, through to succession planning, and ensuring that individuals actually got the support that they needed, bearing in mind that a lot of these ships nowadays have up to 1.5, some ships even 2,000 crew. So you in essence have got a big family, a community, and they live and work on these ships from anywhere from 4 to 6, 7, 8 months at any given time. So in the human resources role, you end up becoming, I used to be known by one captain as Mother Goose, like Father Hen, making sure my brood was looked after, because ultimately you become someone's listening ear. You hear of, you know, individuals that have got children being born while they're away from home, through to, unfortunately, individuals losing family members or things, you know, because they are away, but you then become a lot more than just a HR person. So you very much quickly learn to have empathy with individuals. You also have to learn very quickly to listen to both sides of the stories. You know, traditionally, years gone by, if a captain wasn't happy, you just left the ship. Whereas, you know, bringing things up to date within human resources is very much about making sure that you're there and you work with them and you support them. And on a ship, you can have anywhere up to 50 different nationalities. You can have every single culture, belief working on board, and it all, with everything that goes on in the world, you can work on a cruise ship and it is like a United Nations.
Wow.
And yes, there's a glitch every now and then, but for the most part, it's a peaceful operation and everybody looks after everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, and you know, everyone supports everyone and looks after them as well. So it's an interesting role, it's challenging, but at the same time, it's very rewarding in the sense that you have the opportunity to work with individuals to grow, you know, their career path, if you will, working at sea. And a big challenge with the cruise industry is that, unfortunately, still within hospitality, if you work on a ship, you come off a ship and you go and work in London. A lot of people question, oh, are you going to go back to sea? Are you going to suddenly leave the job and go somewhere else? For the most part, most people, when they leave, it's a big decision to leave a cruise, you know, the cruise industry, because you do get to see amazing destinations and you get to travel the world. But if they come home, it's inevitably because, you know, they're getting married, they've got a family. But, you know, employing someone that's worked on the cruise line, you know that they're going to be on time, they're going to be dedicated, they'll be committed to getting the job done. And they follow processes very well, because within the cruise industry, you have to be able to follow instructions very clearly, especially in the current climate. If there's a situation or a crisis or an emergency, you just go into a different mode and you just get on with it. You don't question it. But you remain positive throughout and calm, because you've been taught and you go through the processes.
That's so interesting. And I guess when you say everyone there is committed, I'm sure they absolutely are. But in a way, they're probably living on the ship, aren't they? So they can't go anywhere. So there's kind of it's harder to pull a sickie, surely.
Well,
Whilst being on
well,
board.
you trust me. People can be late whilst they're working at sea. If you are sick, we've got a doctor and nurse on board just down the hallway. So,
Perfect.
so sometimes you do get people that may be late for work, but inevitably, if they're genuinely ill, they're genuinely ill. You do have a full medical facility on board there as well. But it's a very different environment. And not everyone can actually live and work in a cruise ship. We're finding through some of our clients and colleagues that everyone's working from home, and unfortunately some individuals do struggle with it. So it's like being on a ship again. I've got my room, I go to my office, and I go to somewhere else to have my food. And then I go for a quick walk and come back. So in some ways it's a similar situation, but it's also the mindset on how sort of individuals deal with it as well, I guess.
That's so interesting. I've never thought of that. That is absolutely fascinating. So if you have had that experience, I guess it was almost identical to what we are doing right now, which of course, given the very difficult time that we are recording this, it is COVID-19 is kind of in absolutely full swing. And I suppose in some senses, one might argue it could be, less of a challenge doing this as it would be on board a ship, provided, I suppose, you don't suffer with seasickness
I mean,
or anything like that.
I think the challenge and what we've seen sort of recently, especially with COVID-19, is that the cruise industry has taken a big hit. And inevitably, when you go back through, whenever there's an incident or something happens on a ship, it always hits the press purely because it's, in essence, it's one building or it's one ship and there's something that's happened on it, and you have got anywhere up to 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people on this, this floating ship. So if someone is sick or something happened, it grabs that headline really, really quickly. Cruise ships these days are very much built and equipped to deal with emergencies and crises that happen. Inevitably, when a virus or norovirus comes onto a ship, it's actually 9 times out of 10 comes on board from a passenger that unfortunately doesn't know that they have it or have the symptoms, but they won't say they have the symptoms, purely because if they have the symptoms, then the ship may not allow them to travel for their own safety, but also the safety of the ship itself. So it's challenging times, and what we're finding is that we're staying in touch a lot with our clients. So we've worked with clients throughout. We actually worked on some projects in Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, Thailand and the Maldives. And what we're finding now is the support we're giving is more about reassurance and guidance and support. Unfortunately, some of the countries where we do work in, and they are amazing destinations, yet from a support perspective, when you talk about labour laws or mechanisms there for people within various industries, it's not always where we are per se here within the United Kingdom or other countries. So, and sometimes my phone will go at 6 o'clock in the morning, which inevitably means it's 10 a.m. in the Maldives, which is their morning coffee break. And it will be someone that I've worked with that is now, in a management position, wanting a piece of advice or guidance or reassurance on what they're doing actually makes sense. If you go back to the scenario that you're on a ship, if you're on an island, you live and work in that environment. That's, they've combined some of the islands from lockdown, meaning that no one can leave and no one can come onto the island. So when you're the HR manager or head of HR, your responsibility isn't only about a job, it also then incorporates the well-being, the welfare. You may have individuals that have got young families, you may have individuals that have got anxiety, and they all come to HR. So, HR in London, at the end of the day, their staff goes home, and they look after them, but it's slightly different when they live and work on the island. So their needs are far greater, and those in positions of responsibility like HR you do have to become the person that has to have that listening ear.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, also that person that may have to share some unfortunate news, that there may be a pay freeze, or they may have to close the island because there's no more guests. So the role becomes very, very diverse, and not everybody has the ability to switch off, to have that mode. Okay, I'm in that sort of listening mode, and now I'm in a HR mode.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm in a best mate mode, having a cup of coffee. Not everyone has that ability to sort of disconnect, but at the same time still have empathy with the team that they're working with.
Absolutely. You have to be unbelievably adaptable. I'm quite sure that resilience is one of the absolute top requirements for someone who's not only doing HR, which I consider to be one of the most challenging roles, actually. And interestingly, I do still, on perhaps fewer occasions, hear certain exec members saying, oh, HR is relatively pink and fluffy. And I think, my goodness, it's just amazing that there are still organizations where chief people officers, HR directors don't necessarily have a seat at the C-suite and at the boardroom table.
Yeah.
You think, my goodness, this in particular, when you're talking about being out at sea, and it's a very all-encompassing position where you can't escape it and go home. It is, it's kind of almost like right there on your doorstep. So I get what you're saying about having to switch off and switch on, being able to compartmentalize and everything like that. But one thing I did wonder is, clearly it's a very challenging role. But you did say, one big plus point about it is that you're almost working with the United Nations workforce, and there's something really quite beautiful about that. You're on this floating vessel that's moving all over the place. You've got a whole plethora of different nationalities, ethnicities, differences in mindset, etc. How easy or difficult, perhaps, is it to create a really inclusive environment in such a fast changing type of world that is, working on a ship or working between islands and various resorts and such like?
I think if you look at the ship environment, everyone is treated the same. There is no segregation per se. You don't separate. Yes, you celebrate specific nationalities, like Independence Days and stuff like that. They're always celebrated. But when events are put on, there is always something for everybody to do. So you're not necessarily saying, oh, tonight we're just going to do this, and this is just for these individuals. They, on ships, you may just have a ladies' night in the spa, and and that's where the ladies will go and have their spa trip. But then equally, you open it up to, say, the guys. Not all of them will turn up. So, there are things that work and don't work. Mm-hmm. Generally, everyone gets treated the same. There is no special treatment. Especially with ships now, you actually have got female captains. So you will have a female that is the captain of a ship, potentially with 5,000 guests and up to 1,000 crew. And that individual has the overall responsibility of that ship. So whereas before, you'd have a male captain, you now have female captains in those positions. And it's very much, working within hospitality, you do unfortunately have individuals, and there will always be characters there that, it's their way or the highway, basically. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And within HR, you almost have to, you don't play the game with them. You give your advice as you would give it to anybody. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to accept that the overall responsibility lies with the GM, with the captain, with the CEO. But it's making sure that you give that advice, whether it's the advice that they want to hear or they don't want to hear. You've done your part to make sure that, the right thing has been done at the time. And yeah, HR's on ships. Very much a few cruise lines actually have the HR as part of what they call the captain's committee, which is all the department heads. And some actually have the HR manager sitting around that table with, be like the boardroom in a corporate entity, actually is part of that structure as well.
Interesting. So do you think then and again, forgive my naivety, and I'm sure I'm hoping, I'm hoping that many of our listeners are thinking the same thing as me, because, for me, this is just fascinating. I'm picturing life on the ship and the captain whilst you're talking. But do you think, because I think historically HR has sometimes struggled to find an inclusive place around the boardroom table, just being quite frank about it, maybe not so much now, but I think it has been a struggle for it not to be viewed as being something fluffy. Do you think in one respect, actually, it has been easier for HR to find that place of significance within the ship environment because of the fact that it is so about eating and breathing, sleeping people all the time?
Yeah, in some ways actually tougher, purely because up until the point of having, a HR entity on board, the captain at that point in time had overall control and responsibility of everything.
Yeah,
So
but what I'm saying is, in a way, has it been not easier, but has it been easier? Whilst I think HR can be more challenging, say on a ship, as we've discussed, but do you think it has been easier potentially for HR to get the seat at the table of decision making? I.e., you were talking there about almost being like the right hand man or the right hand woman to the captain, where the captain's always been the one who has had the say for everything, but actually HR, because they're such a necessary function within the ship environment, have almost got that seat of power more readily within the ship environment.
I think in the beginning it took a lot of time. I know with one cruise line, I was one of the very first HR managers on board, and up until that point there had been nothing there. So it was a lot about gaining that trust and respect of the captain, of that individual there, that you weren't there to tell them how to do their job. You weren't there to dictate to them. You were there to support them. You were there to guide them. And in some cases had the ability to say, look, I will deal with that investigation. Let me do everything, independently, neutrally, and come back and present. Because on a ship, the staff captain looks after all of your security and safety. So ultimately it sits with them. So it also, with the amount of work that they have to do every single day, you're now going to them saying, look, leave that with me. I'll do I'll do what needs to be done, and then you come back and present it to them. And with one captain, unfortunately, there was an incident with one of his own officers, and we went through and did the whole process of a investigation. And at the end of it, the captain looked at me and said, I'm so glad that you had someone completely independent to actually sort of bring him in, but also give him questions that he may not necessarily would have thought of. Because up until that point, it was very much a sort of closed environment. So I think having the power at the table, in some ways within the cruise industry, it's part of that team. It's very much a team effort. And I think over time, individuals have come to respect that position being there, because it becomes another support mechanism for them. And as a senior member, in any company, having the ability to talk to someone that isn't going to judge you, that isn't going to say you're right or you're wrong, but, as we've spoken about earlier, is that just having someone to talk to and listen to, and have to walk up, and you don't necessarily have to give them an answer. It's just that someone goes, oh, thanks very much for having that, that 5-minute chat. And I think, with a lot of, especially within confined environments, say in the Maldives or, on a ship, it's having that. I always say to people when we do, if I do workshops and things, I always say to them, you have to find something that I call me time. I need to, you need to know that you can I had one GM that used to block lunch every day of the week, 1 hour. And that for him was his me time. If he did work, if he went for lunch, but that was his time, and no one could use that time. It was just purely for him. So whenever I do sessions, I say, you need to find your me time. My me time is going and having a coffee, and just having 5 minutes out, or, on a ship, I'd get permission. I'd go onto the bridge wing and have my coffee and just have my 5-10 minutes. And it's having that ability to sort of take that step back and that deep breath. But by having that individual there within HR, you have that element of, as I call it, look, if you want to download, vent, that's fine, because it doesn't go anywhere else. You put it in a little box and it sort of sits there. Because it may be something bigger that you find out later, but at the same time, it's it's having that presence, I think, because I think if the presence is there and that trust and respect is there, then the position or the seat of power, if you will, sort of comes automatically, because they trust you, they respect you, and when decisions need to be made, when they turn around to you and say, "Oh, and what do you think?" You think, okay, you've got yourself there without sort of banging drums or waving flags.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's built, for me, it was always building that trust and respect, and once you had it, you were sort of accepted.
You've got it.
And I think, unfortunately, some companies still struggle to see the importance of the HR functionality and the support that it can give to a business. Especially now, they're all going to be looking at HR saying, what are you going to do? What's happening? And some people will forget very quickly. When this is all over, they'll be like, well, what do you want? Whereas it's almost that you're that department that doesn't wave its flag, doesn't, hoop and holler, but you're there when they need you to be there, but at the same time, you step back when you need to step back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely instrumental. I truly believe HR is one of the most important functions when it comes to leading and managing businesses, because you are, like you say, you're that confidant, you are the wingman or the wing woman to the leader, and someone that allows them to kind of vent and discuss and to air their thoughts. Because let's face it, leadership can be an incredibly lonely place. The amount of CEOs that I speak with who really are struggling, battling it alone
Absolutely.
out on the seas.
Yeah.
As we've been talking about, HR really is that supportive function. And again, before we run out of time today, because I'm keen to ask you another couple of questions kind of in our lightning round, I wondered kind of finally, what are some of the kind of the observations that you've noticed? Obviously, you've had a number of decades worth of experience across multi-sectors, especially within hospitality and such. It has historically been one that I would say to a degree is, I'm not saying it has not been inclusive, but I think there have been very stereotypical roles. And we discussed this, I think, on our first call, whether it be waitresses, waiters and such like. Have you seen the world of hospitality become more inclusive, would you say? Because I think, the ship environment, clearly lots of multicultural nationalities, melting pot of individuals there. What about kind of breaking down stereotypes and the trends and the changes that you've seen and observed over the last couple of decades from an HR and an inclusivity point of view? And I know it's a big question to end.
It's one of those questions that you're like, how long have you got? It's a very, it's a big topic and it's a broad topic, but it's a very important topic. I think you're finding a lot more of individuals becoming a lot more, I suppose, comfortable, acceptable with that. A waitress doesn't necessarily have to be that stereotypical type of a waitress. There are some hospitality brands and companies now that, they celebrate their employees and say, we're not going to have a uniform. You can dress as you want. We expect you to behave in a certain way. So you can go to some, places in London and you'll have someone serve you that you, from a hospitality perspective, you would think, but when you break it down, they're just an individual. They're just a human being. They're doing a job, but it's breaking that barrier of not going to somewhere, say like a top 5-star hotel where it's, silver service and it's very elegant. You wouldn't necessarily expect to see someone with a lot of tattoos or a moustache or earrings. Yet in some environments, it works and it works well. So I think it's very much become a lot more inclusive. I still think, and I know people will say, oh, it's not. And I think it's got better from what it was 20 years ago. I think there's a lot more openness to acceptance of, different, individuals. It becomes very complex in the sense that you almost put people into a different box, which I don't really like to do, but then it's not you, it's other individuals will say, well, we fit within this stereotype, or we fit in with this stereotype. But I'm seeing it, you see a lot more of it also within supermarkets, albeit it's not hospitality, but they are serving individuals and they're dealing with customers every single day. For example, our local co-op is so fun. You go in and they're all different types of people, they're working there, but it actually creates a really fun environment. Mm-hmm. I think to answer your question, yes, it's changed. I still think there's a long way to go with certain companies and certain structures. However, as we sort of alluded to, for me, if the support isn't coming from that person sitting in the top chair at the very top, you will always come against the struggle and a challenge, because if the support isn't coming from that level where it should, it doesn't matter how far down you go, there will always become a resistance to it. I think some organisations do it far better than others, but that's purely on who sits in that chair and who makes, the final decisions.
I completely agree with you. And I know it's a bit of a tough question there because it was incredibly broad brush. And of course, hospitality, it covers so many different types of organizations and plethoras of individuals and such like. But what you're ultimately saying there, I believe to be one of the fundamental pieces in the jigsaw to get that inclusive shift is the CEO, the captain, the individuals that sit right at the top of the tree, because ultimately that is, it's demonstrating the trickle effect. If you have a CEO there who, even for example, someone who I know quite well, the CEO of Pizza Express, I know it's a different type of hospitality, but he's incredibly inclusive, embraces lots of different types of individuals, whoever can come into the restaurant, whomever, they literally do embrace all different kinds of individual. But I think you compare that to kind of a 5-star organization, there are certain limitations, but absolutely does it depend on the leader who is in that chair and the person who ultimately, excuse the pun, is steering the ship. So I couldn't help myself.
That's okay.
But it absolutely does, doesn't it? But no, you're completely right. I think when we look kind of holistically, and again, it was maybe perhaps an unfair question because it is so broad, and I'm sure some people are thinking, no, it's not more inclusive. But there are lots of different types of hospitality organizations now. Things aren't perhaps quite as formal as they used to be, and just to pull on your kind of your these stereotypes or the visual diversities, be it someone who's got tattoos or piercings or what have you, lots of organizations now are more open to this and actually embrace this, and they become more cool hotspots when it comes to hospitality.
I mean, when I first worked for Disney, you couldn't have visible tattoos, you weren't allowed to have facial hair. The times have changed, and they have changed the way that they allow their employees or cast members to present themselves to members of the public or guests coming in. And I think it's that a lot of it comes down to society, in the sense in how individuals have been raised, what they see on TV is the norm, and what is acceptable and not acceptable. Working within schools, on boards, etc., like that. And you go out and meet the teachers and the principals, and you look in the playground, and you have got, it's like a rainbow of colours and the kids just don't care. They're just having a great laugh. Mm-hmm. You look at adults and think, okay, somewhere along the line, you've been taught something very different. Mm-hmm. Where when they're children, you just see them in the playground, and the kids just have a ball. Yet they're all very different. Different backgrounds, etc. But I think as you get older, it depends on how you've been taught and what you see as what is the norm.
Mm-hmm. What the societal norm is. Absolutely.
And it also, Maldives, for example, culturally, if you go onto a local island, inhabited, the gentlemen wear sarongs, and that is the norm. That for them would be their normal daily, whereas from someone coming from, say, Europe to see it, why are they wearing like a long dress? It's part of their culture and history, and for them, it's normal. So the teenagers, the guys, when they do traditional dancing, it's the normal to wear, that type of costume, because they don't see it any differently. Whereas someone in Europe, like, oh, it's a man in a dress or a skirt. It's not. It's part of their history and their culture.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it's been an absolutely fascinating journey, Neil, journeying across the world, experiencing different cultures, what different norms mean, and especially from the HR perspective. I think it's been a thoroughly enjoyable show today, and I'm realizing what the time is, and we've been talking probably for about 45 minutes. It's been a very long podcast, but actually thoroughly enjoyable. And so before we go, I'm going to ask you one question, actually, from our usual kind of lightning round questions, but I wonder, from a lot of the discussions we've had today, whether it be to speaking out to HR listeners that we have, or to anyone, in fact, who's dealing with particularly difficult times of change, what advice might you be able to give to people from the HR perspective and from your personal perspective that might help and encourage others?
I think, especially with everything that's going on, there's a lot of change happening. I think those within HR, you have to have the ability to step back and look at the bigger picture. Don't get so bogged down on just one piece of the jigsaw puzzle. You do need to have the ability to step back and look at everything from a much broader perspective. And don't be afraid to pick up the phone and talk to somebody about it. A lot of HR will become very silo in the sense that, my company won't allow me to talk to anyone or share information. This day and age, for me, that's irrelevant, especially now. If you're struggling, talk to someone, pick up the phone, speak to another HR professional in the next hotel or the next business, or, find someone that you can talk to, because sometimes it's just having that ability to share it with someone, to talk it through. And you actually may go, I'm not going crazy, I'm actually doing the right thing. But then you also may find support from somebody else because they're in exactly the same position and they don't know how to deal with certain things. So, change will happen whether we like it or not, but step back, look at the bigger picture, pick up the phone, share information, talk to somebody. Because I guarantee you someone will be going through exactly the same as you are right now. So don't, it's that old thing, if you don't ask the question, you don't know, so pick up the phone, talk to someone, ask the question, and step back and look at what's going on.
Thank you ever so much, Neil, for being here with us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very, very much. And as usual, I'm going to do a quick summary. And I think actually today, it's amazing how many comparables. In fact, even I did not realize the comparables between working on a ship and certainly from an HR environment and some of the self-isolation that we're experiencing right now. So, I guess if you are looking for advice, I hope that you have managed to glean some wisdom from the podcast today with Neil. I certainly can see, and I never really thought that before the beginning of this podcast, that there would be so many comparables, frankly, between, working on a ship in such a, such a challenging environment. Also there is now, but ultimately some of the lessons still remain consistent and remain the same. And I think those are the really important pieces to draw from today's podcast, is being open-minded and really listening, whichever industry we work in, whether we're on a ship, whether we're in the air, whether we're on land. Right now, we're all in the same boat. And actually, it's all about listening. It is about listening. It's about supporting. It's about guiding. And it's being there for one another. When you work in an HR capacity where your role is really more fundamental now than it ever has been, times of challenge like this are where people must come first. And the role of the HR professional is absolutely fundamental, the heart and soul of making sure people are okay, they're safe and they're well, but also making sure that you're okay and you're safe and well as well. Because if you can't look after yourself, you certainly can't look after anyone else. So do make sure you are, as Neil said, picking up the phone. Don't be worried, don't be shy about it. There is no better time than now to really share those vulnerabilities and to share the anxieties that we have, because if we share those and we try and collaborate and club together, we can get through this together. So thank you ever so much, Neil. I know that we'll be hearing from you again, hopefully on one of our future panels around hospitality. So I shall look forward to seeing you then. And as usual, the podcast will be available on www.dialglobal.org/podcast or www.leilamckenzie.com/podcast. My name is Leila Mackenzie Dellis, and you are listening to the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast show. We're with you every week, but at the moment we're here more frequently because of supporting people in uncertain times. So if you want to write in or you want to ask any questions to any of our guests who have been on the shows, or myself or any of the team, please do reach out online via LinkedIn or through the website. Look forward to seeing you again very soon. Stay safe, stay well, and thank you again, Neil. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.